Now in this tutorial we'll work on this little kind of this heading or this little subheading, maybe it's a tagline for this image. And you'll recall from when we did the design, we added a few effects to it. It's kind of this inset effect where it kind of looks like it's pushed in. We're going to recreate all of these effects with pure CSS on this object. And so I'll show you how we can do that. Now let's jump back to our HTML because we need to create this in HTML first. So we'll come down to that section down here in our side area, and after this featured image, we're going to call this, we're just going to add a div here. And I'm going to say class equals well. And so I'm just going to call this thing a well. Kind of borrowed this term from Twitter's Bootstrap, their CSS framework. And we'll close this div off here. And inside of this div is simply just a paragraph of text. And so we'll create this little paragraph here, and we'll jump back to Photoshop to snag this text. So we'll call this call out text or whatever. We'll just paste that in there and close the paragraph. All right, so that's looking pretty good. We'll close this div down afterwards as well, just to make this a little more readable. So we have our div, we have our paragraph or our span, and then this. So there it is. And we need to flesh out the CSS to make this work. So let's jump back here and move over to our style sheet. And I'm gonna change this from a paragraph actually to a span tag, because it's not a true paragraph. It's more just like a single sentence or a little tagline. So that seems a little bit more semantic to me. And we'll jump back here to our style sheet and start to work on this well. So down here at the very bottom, we'll say side well dot well. And we actually probably don't even need this side. We don't need to have this rule that specific in case we want to use a well at another place besides the sidebar. And we'll start to flesh out the content here for this well. Start with the background color. So background dash color. And we're going to set this equal to the same color we've chosen here in Photoshop. So I'll just get my eyedropper tool and sample that color. And back to Photoshop, and we'll remember our pound sign. And let's save and refresh. I'm going to do this step by step by step. So I'm going to do one thing and save and refresh so we can kind of see. I'll zoom in here on this area so we can see that. But you can see it does have that background color, in fact, in there now. And the next thing we're going to do is let's add a little bit of padding. We'll just say 5 pixels so that that text doesn't bump all the way against the edges, and we'll refresh. And then there's a little bit of padding around that. So that's looking okay. And we're going to make the font style italics so that the font there is italicized. That's looking okay. Jump back to here again. And we want the font size to be a little bit smaller, so maybe we'll say 0.9 ems. So it's not quite as big, it's a little bit smaller, and that looks okay. Excuse me. The next thing we want to do is align the text to the center. So text-align center. And save and refresh that. So now the text is right over there in the middle of that little well. Next thing we want to do is bold the text. So we'll say font-weight bold and save and refresh that. You can see that makes the text bold. That's looking pretty good. And the next thing we want to do is change the color of the text. And you can make this whatever color you want. I'll just jump back here and sample this. I guess it's the same color up here that we have in our color scheme up here, this color over here. And we might switch this in a minute depending on if there's enough contrast. We'll save that and refresh. So there's the text change. And then we're going to add some of the properties that make the inset effect. And there's going to be some CSS3 things we'll do in order to add that. So what we want to do is we're going to change border dash radius. And this is going to give us round corners. And I'll set this equal to 5 pixels and refresh. And this is tricky to see, but I'm going to zoom in here. And you can see that it did, in fact, round those corners ever so slightly. Once we turn on the borders, you'll be able to see it a little bit better. In fact, just to illustrate how that did, I'm just going to make this black. Save and refresh. And you can see what that border radius does right there. It just rounds the corners of an element. So I'll undo that, set that back to that color. And we're going to add a box shadow next. So I'm going to say box-shadow. And this is a lot like the text shadow we worked with earlier. The values are the same. So I'm going to set this one to -1 pixels, which is the horizontal. The vertical is -1 pixels. The amount of blur is 0 pixels. So I don't want that to be anything. And then I'll do an Rgba value again. And I'm going to set this to black. So 0, 0, 0. And then like 20% opacity. So basically this is going to set up a shadow on the top left edge at 20%. So it's going to add a little bit of that. You can kind of see it there, that top left shadow, just like that. And then I'm going to do a comma because one of the properties of box shadows is that you can add as many as you want. So I'm going to copy this and do it right after the comma. And this one's going to be kind of just the opposite. It's going to be at the bottom right. So it's going to be 1, 1, 0. And instead of black, this one's going to be white. So 255, 255, 255. And maybe this one will only be halfway transparent, so 50%. Let's save that, jump over here, and refresh. And you can see that adds that little bit of a white highlight down at the bottom right edge. Now, if you don't know what the Rgba values are, you can get those from Photoshop. If you just come into Photoshop and sample white, that's hex, and these RGB, that's the values for white. If you switch to black, notice it's 0, 0, 0, somewhere in the middle. So that's the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. With the hex value, the first two are the red, the second two are the green, and the last two are the blue. So either method, CSS supports both methods of displaying color. So let's jump back here and refresh, and then let's zoom back out to 100% and see what that looks like. So you can see we've replicated most of that effect that we created inside of Photoshop for our sidebar, for that little bit of well, with pure CSS. So we didn't need to save out any images, which is going to save on our download time. So in the next video, we'll just create these next few images and then start to work on this little testimonial.